The Flames. History's greatest secret and key to a future where ships travel lifetimes to bring flames to new worlds. Those who dare to walk the fire can cross between the stars with a step if you can find a ferryman and pay your way across. For most who brave the flame alone are lost forever. May the ferryman take you. Part 2 of 3 Talents and a Good Nose. Stan's nose wrinkled again, the absence of scent still hounding him. The rock shield beneath them was a blank olfactory slate. No telltales of pollution, no industry, no flora or fauna. Nothing save the artificial scents decorating the kelders themselves. He twitched his oversized nose, wondering why his brain kept waving that flag at him when, clearly, he'd just walked his tender into something awkward at best and potentially threatening at worst. Damn Franks and her deep voice, and double damn the church's again not exhaustive enough protocols for failing to identify this he, she, sis, they mess before he'd walked her right into it. Kelder was far too distant from the other worlds linked by the flames for visual observation. The missionary probe had carried the flame and little more, so all the church knew about this world was generations old, historical records in all their noble reliability. That and what little their probe could catalog from orbit with its primitive sensors. The whole planet scanned as a jumble of indecipherable rocky plain and dark patches of water. Originally settled as a mining colony, Kelder's mineral resources were plentiful. The world was comprised of almost 50% water, too, dotting the world in a series of lakes, all of which had been seeded with oxygen-generating algae that had done a dandy job of making the place human viable. Crops had flourished on the world, and the colony had quickly become well off. With that wealth had come perverse but predictable changes in human politics, concentrating the wealth into fewer and fewer hands. Male hands, apparently, Stan thought. He took another look at the crowd. Yep, all men. Mostly old men, too. With no resource pressures, no hint of environmental problems on the horizon, and no class conflicts of note. Ingrained sexism apparently having been overlooked here as in so many other societies, then Kelder had given no warning of their plan to extinguish the flame, cutting themselves off from the church and all of humankind. Few thinkers could understand why any world would want to douse the flame, uniting them with the galaxy, despite the statistical likelihood of this colony surviving on its own. That statistical likelihood was enough for the missionary probe to be diverted to Kelder, which was what led 70-odd years later in the here and now to Stan listening to the ferryman sigh. Mayflies, grunted Tran. His deep brown eyes, infinitely older than their youthful appearance, rolled towards the pale sky. The church doesn't need your world, but you obviously need them, or you wouldn't have walked and knocked. Is this really how you want to open? Tender Franks chuckled dryly and cocked a hip. It's fine, Tran, she said, and tossed her silvery mane in a way Stan had never seen her try before. He'd never seen the smug smile that grew on her face as the Kelder men stiffened in the face of her display of femininity either. The flame warms all, even sorry sons of bitches like the Kelder. She beckoned for Stan to join her. He hurried over, still feigning ignorance and awe. As he approached, he saw the younger man make the same warding gesture the Kelder had. Stan let his body twitch nervously as he approached, getting limber and ready. He angled his body in apparent deference to the woman, but the downturned face and cocked ear was just cover. It put him in position to intercept the not-linguist Telford if he went for Franks. Yes, Tender? She turned to Kellogg to speak. From a distance, and for the cameras, it would look as if the Kelder was speaking with Stan, not the Tender, while to all those standing on the plinth it was clear her eyes stared coldly to the side, skewering the slender Kelder leader. It seems we have a breakdown in communications, Kellogg. Why don't you get us back on track? Find out what these gentlemen would like the church to do for them. Of course, Tender, Stan murmured and shifted his gaze to their ill-mannered hosts. Both Kelder men's faces had turned ugly. Stan guessed they didn't hear Frank's mocking tone very often, or perhaps not ever, from someone stocked with XX chromosome. How? Stan muttered, bowing his head and peering up at the Kelder. Most esteemed hosts, I am your servant. How can I The Kelder grew impatient with the stuttering, incomplete words and cut Stan off, just as angry as Stan had hoped he would become. Breeding stock. His eyes crossed to the tender and then roved on past. His hands continued to move in a sham for the cameras, as if to lend weight to some lofty point of discussion. In exchange, we offer refined minerals, neodymium, several rare earth minerals we know are still in high demand throughout your perverted culture. Stan kept his emotions off his face, stayed in the role of the daunted and starry-eyed innocent, and shifted his gaze back to Frank's. "Won't you please tell these gentlemen?" Franks said, the final word clearly phrased counter to its meaning, but her face returning to a neutral expression nonetheless. "The Church is aware of Kelder's bounty, and yes, there are many worlds where life would be easier for such an exchange of medical techniques and treatment." Tran studied his polished fingernails. "If the corporations don't lock those rights down first," he offered in a bored tone. Stan tried not to frown at the ferryman. It wasn't Tran's lack of respect for the Church or the effect that tone of his might have on these suddenly thorny talks that bothered him. It was the fact Tran was right. Serving the Church sometimes meant getting his hands dirty. Other times it could mean standing by and watching as the Church did. If needs demanded that Stan facilitate the corporations before the masses today, he'd do what was needed, and just hope his hand was steady when he scrawled the sin out at Cindering. "Ever the greater good shall salve where the Church burns," he thought. Outwardly, he spoke in the tender's stead. "There have been many advances in gene pool health, Sir Kelders. Church scientists are ever at the service of worlds in need. Even more so for worlds that accept a Church presence for their citizens and offer tithe through the flame." Telford cursed softly under his breath and bunched his fists. Stan blinked and backed away a step. "If I have offered offense, no," the Kelder said. He wasn't looking at Stan now, but at the tender, and his eyes burned. Disgust warred with some other emotion on his face, something haughty and entitled and ugly. "No more games. You played your hand already. You confessed your desire for what we can give you before you stepped onto our world. Don't pretend you don't want it now." He walked forward, his smile growing into a leer as he stared down at the shorter woman. "No Church will open on Kelder, and not one of your devil scientists will visit. Giving up on a pretense or two, are we?" The tender spat and stepped on forward, unafraid. Still quite happy wearing his pretense, Stan stepped between the two, head bowed, not out of deference for these insular yokels, simply to watch their footwork. "Please take no offense, gentlemen," Stan squeaked in a high-pitched voice as he observed how the Kelder had planted himself solidly, a man used to operating from a position of privilege, above all around him. Telford stood with knees bent, one foot back, halfway into an attack position. Not a problem for Stan. He was already confident he could take the bigger man in hand-to-hand. Then Telford shifted on the balls of his feet to face the ferryman, and that definitely was a problem. "Perhaps," Stan squeaked again, "we should retire away and return with the tender more to your liking." "No," the tender hissed. "I'll have what I want here and now." He stepped closer to the tender. Stan cursed as the old fool blocked his view of his opponent. Frank snorted. "I don't have the equipment, training, or any particular interest in helping you with whatever fertility problems plague you, Kelder." Stan's eyes darted between their faces, debating how badly the Church needed the resources Kelder was dangling. His acolyte half wondered that, but he was trained as a soldier, not a political game player, and he had no idea, nor, as Franks had said, any particular training or interest in that line of work. And his soldier half was already through planning the series of 4 strikes to the old man's throat and ribcage, then to the linguist my ass's kneecap and jaw that it would take to get his people running back through the flame. Mess up Church politics or ensure Tran and Frank's survival. Which way to go? At the moment it was a neck-and-neck race between his soldier half and acolyte half. "We want no science," the old man hissed. "We want no medicine. We want stock." The Kelder's face was now a mottled red, his lips pulling back from his teeth in a snarl, And suddenly Stan recognized that other emotion on his face. Arousal. No venal desire for pleasure, no simple carnal lust. This, not even the allure of sexual violence, though Stan had seen enough animals like the kelder to know he dealt in all those dark appetites. This display was more hateful, simple, and pure. The imperious and infantile expression of power, of asserting control, of taunting his prey with the certainty that he could have whatever he wanted. Whoever he wanted. However he wanted. This little man based his worth on others' subservience and fear. A common enough symptom of the self-doubting, the powerless, the The pieces clicked together. Stan gasped, and again he took in the air of the world, and again he smelled nothing. That's when Stan knew, and cursed himself for being still something of a dreamer, for wanting to be wrong, even after all the ugliness he'd seen. You're sterile. And not just this man, who spun on Stan and snarled, and not just Telford, whose face turned to stone at the words. All of Kelder was sterile. Walk the Fire by John Miro. Learn more at servingworlds.com. Theme music, Full On by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com. Many of the stories you listen to at servingworlds.com were made possible by the support of patrons at patreon.com/servingworlds. If you like what you hear, please consider adding your support. Thank you for listening.